Hi, welcome to Virtual CB1A. This is Ma'am Rena, and for this video discussion, we are going to talk about population proportion. So the last time, we discussed or we had an introduction to statistical inference, and you'll learn the different steps in performing a test of hypothesis. So dito, actual test of hypothesis na yung gagawin natin. And it is on a single proportion muna. Yung example na pin-prepare ko is for a single proportion. So, test on a single proportion. The null hypothesis is the population proportion is equal to P sub 0 or the hypothesized value of P. So, ito yung theoretical value natin or yung kiniklaim dun sa ating research. Now, we have two different types of proportions. Yung isa, we are going to make use of point estimators, and yung isa naman, interval estimator. Na-discuss ko na before kung ano yung difference ng point at saka ng interval. So, sa point, you are comparing just a single value. Wherein sa interval estimator naman or sa confidence intervals, you are actually plotting the location of the probable value or estimate of the whole population. So, ang tinitingnan mo ay yung range of values niya. Ayan. So, meron tayong lower limit and upper limit. So, for point estimator, so we have P hat is equal to A over N, where A is the number of sample units possessing the attribute of interest. And the standard error of P hat is equal to the square root of P hat times 1 minus P hat over N. Tapos sa interval estimator naman, A, 1 minus alpha times 100% confidence interval about P is P hat plus minus Z alpha over 2 times the square root of P hat times 1 minus P over N, where Z alpha over 2 is such that the probability of Z is greater than Z alpha over 2, which is equal to alpha over 2. Okay? Lagay tayo ng example. Ayan. So, for the test procedure and test statistic, our Z value will be equal or Z computed. Ito yung i-compare natin sa value from the table. Z computed is equal to P hat minus the theoretical value or the claimed proportion over the square root of the assumed value, P sub O, times 1 minus P sub O over N. Okay? So, now, ano yung assumption natin? So, ang assumption natin, pwede mo lang gamitin yung test for proportions pag ang data mo ay assumed to be a random sample. Kapag kaya ni purposive at hindi siya randomized, you cannot use test of proportion. At isa pa, dapat yung distribution mo ng sample n times your assumed proportion should be greater than or equal to 10. At yung difference between 1 minus P sub 0, for example, if your P sub 0, your assumed proportion is equal to 0.20. Yan. So, pwede mo lang gamitin itong test of proportion natin if the number of samples times 0.20 is greater than or equal to 10. And also, if the number of samples times 1 minus 0.20 is also greater than, teka, lagay ko na dito yung yung formula. Tapos mag-check tayo mamaya. N times N sub 0 is both greater than or equal to 10. So, ang pinakang list na value natin ay 10. So, paano kung ang number of samples mo ay, say for example, 30? Is it possible to perform test of proportion? So, tingnan natin. N times 0.20, that is 30 times 0.20. What is 30 times 0.20? So, 20% of 30 is 6. Tama? Okay, 6. And 6 is less than 10. So, kung 30 lang ang population mo, hindi mo pwedeng i-perform yung test of proportion. Ngayon, taasan natin yung number of samples. Halimbawa, number of samples mo naman ay 80. Kung 80 yung number of samples mo dito, 80 times 0.20, you will end up with 16. So, pwede mo na siyang gamitin. Also, you have to check 80 times 1 minus 0.20, which is 80 times 0.80, which is equal to 64. Okay, pwede mo siyang gamitin kasi both greater than 10. For the decision rule, ang titingnan naman natin ay kung two-tailed siya or one-tailed. So, kapag ka two-tailed siya, such as this, the absolute value of z computed must be greater than z alpha over 2. And if it is one-tailed, to the right, greater than, z computed must be greater than z alpha. And finally, for z computed na less than, left-tailed naman siya, it should be less than negative z alpha. Okay? Okay. So, sinulat ko dito yung formula at saka yung decision rule para pagtetest natin ng hypothesis dito, madali natin mahahanap yung mga kailangan natin. This is the sample problem. The US Census reports that in 2010, 48% of households have no children. A random sample of 500 households was taken to assess if the population proportion has changed from the census value of 0.48. Use the 500 households. Of the 500 households, 220 have no children. Use a 10% significance level. Ayan, nakasulat na dito yung confidence level natin, which is 90%. And our alpha is equal to 0.10. So, construct na tayo ng null and alternative hypothesis. Sa generic na lang muna natin siya isulat. Okay? So, ang proportion natin na given dito is 0.48. Ito yung assumed na proportion. So, we have to check if the true proportion of the population is different from 0.48. Kasi ang nakalagay dito ay a random sample of 500 households was taken to assess if the population proportion has changed. Pero wala siyang direksyon na sinabi. Hindi sinabi kung greater than 0.48 or less than 0.48 na siya. So, ang pairing natin ng null and alternative should be, of course, hindi nagbabago si null, lagi lang yung equal. Si alternative, it should be not equal. And of course, our assumed proportion is 0.48. Generic na lang para hindi na tayo magsusulat ng sentence. Sa decision na lang natin isulat yung buong sentence. Okay? Okay. Step number 2. So, nakapag-construct na tayo ng null and alternative. Ano yung susunod na step natin? Ay, ba't nag-paste? According sa diniscuss natin before, the second step in performing hypothesis testing is to verify necessary conditions and if met, summarize the data into an appropriate test statistic. So, ilagay natin yung mga data condition. May assumption tayo, 'di ba, na kailangan nating ma-meet. So, sabi sa assumption natin kanina, the data are assumed to be a random sample. And then, n times the assumed proportion should be greater than or equal to 10. And n times 1 minus p sub 0, or assumed proportion, must be greater than or equal to 10 as well. Sabi dito, random sample siya. Okay, pwede tayong mag-z-test kung yung first na assumption lang yung magiging basis natin. Second na assumption, check conditions. So, random, sample siya, and n times p sub 0 is equal to how many households? 500. 500 times 48% or 0.48. Kuha tayo ng calcu. Mag-compute tayo. Oops. $240. Okay, 240 is greater than 10. So, check. Pwede natin siya gamitin. Yung another one, n times 1 minus p sub 0, it should be 500 times 0.52. Obviously, since mas malaki yung percentage nito, mag-occupy ito ng mas malaking value kaysa sa, or magre-result to sa mas malaking value kaysa sa 500. Which is 260. And 260 plus 240 is equal to 500. Okay. So, ano yung gagamitin natin na test statistic? So, we are going to use z-test. Anong klaseng z-test yung gagamitin natin? From our condition here, since not equal yung null hypothesis natin, we are going to use z-test two-tailed. So, z-test of proportion two-tailed. Dun sa diniscuss natin before na table or chart, ito siya. So, z-test for proportion. Yan yung gagamitin natin. And one sample lang. Kasi wala tayong ibang sample aside from the 500 set of US citizens. Okay, clear tayo sa steps 1 and 2. Punta na tayo sa step number 3. Ayan. So, step number 3, specify the level of significance. Okay. Ano ang level of, siguro hiramin ko na to papunta dito sa pinakang baba para hindi tayo pabalik-balik sa taas, no? So, copy ko na to. Papunta dito sa last page. Okay, next na step natin, number 3, specify level of significance. So, according to our problem, step 3, our level of significance is 0.10. Okay? And this corresponds to a certain value in frequency. So this corresponds to a certain value dito. So we are going to check Z. Since we are two-tailed, we are looking for Z alpha over 2. And then we are going to check for the value of this in the table. Let me just get the value. So I have here the table of critical values. This is for the T distribution. But the Z here is located here. Ayan, yun nandito sa large. Or in some books, you will see that this is interpreted as alpha or infinity. Okay. So what I'm going to do is to copy this to our view board. This is going to be our chart. By the way, you can find this table dun sa book na sinend ko sa inyo, Elementary Statistics, 13th edition. Nandito siya sa appendices, mga tables na, Z-scores and T-table. Okay? Okay. So now, maghanap tayo ng value ng Z alpha over 2. So, ang titingnan natin ay yung area ng two tails. Tapos yung alpha na 0.10. Therefore, our Z alpha over 2 is 1.645. So, dito natin i-compare yung computed value natin ng Z. So, if, di ba positive, negative siya? So, negative 1.645 at saka positive 1.645. If your computed value falls on the outside tails, either side, we are going to reject our HO. So, reject HO on this side, reject HO on this side then. Okay? Meron tayong dalawang tails. Or, kung gusto natin siyang pasimplihin, Z computed, yung absolute value niya, less than man or greater than, magiging positive yan, must be greater than 1.645. Yan lang yung sinasabi nung condition natin dito sa decision rule. Ito. So, Z computed must be greater than or equal to Z alpha over 2. And Z alpha over 2 is 1.645. So, alam na natin yung critical values. Ito yung ating critical value. Or, ang tawag natin dito kanina ay ito yung threshold. Ayan. Ito yung magsisilbing guide natin kung magre-reject tayo or mag-a-accept. Punta na tayo sa susunod na step. Ang next na step natin ay number 4. Ay! Number 4 na pala yung ginawa ko. Determine the critical region of the test. Sorry. Lagay ko na lang dito ha. Ito na yung number 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Kulang kasi tayo sa space. Okay. Number 5. Step 5. Assuming the null hypothesis is true, compute the value of the test statistic. Okay. Magko-compute na tayo. Yan. I-apply na natin ito. I think it will be better if duplicate ko na lang. Okay, punta na tayo sa step number 5. Magko-compute na tayo. So, computation. So, computation, z computed is equal to our proportion, actual proportion, and assumed proportion. So, ano yung p hat natin? So, p hat is, out of 500, 220 have no children. So, meron tayong A over N. A is the total number of respondents who qualified dun sa condition natin na no children. So, meron tayong 220 divided by 500, which is, just wait a moment, kuha tayo ng calcu. Okay, meron tayong 0.44. So, this is 0.44 minus the assumed proportion of 0.48. Okay, so para malinaw tayo dito, A is 220, N is 500. Dito ko kinukuha yung mga, yung mga value natin. 220 over 500, which is 0.44. And then, yung assumed proportion natin ay yung given sa problem, which is 0.48. Okay? Sana maliwanag. If you have any questions, send me a message. So, we have assumed proportion, 0.48 times 1 minus 0.48 divided by 500. And then, ito yung magiging sagot natin for z computed. Okay, nag-compute na ako. It is negative 1.79028 or 03. Okay. So, tapos na tayo sa step 5. May computed na tayo ng value ng z. Punta na tayo sa step number 6. Sabi ni step number 6, decide whether or not the result is statistically significant based on the value of the test statistics. So, i-apply na natin yung rules sa decision rule. So, decision. Since z computed, or the absolute value of z computed is greater than z alpha over 2, that is, the absolute value of negative 1.7903 is greater than 1.645, yung critical region natin or critical value natin, we can reject HO. Okay. Gawa na tayo ng conclusion. Last na. So, number 7, step. Report the conclusion in the context of the situation. Conclusion. So, there is enough evidence to suggest that the proportion of household with no children is not 48%. Okay, we're not sure if it is greater than 48 or less than 48. Ang mahalaga, hindi siya equal sa 48%. Okay? Okay. I hope I made this part very clear. Tinry ko siyang mapadali as much as I can. Okay, if you want to view the whole steps, ito yung nasa steps 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, and 4 natin. And then, ito naman yung para sa 5, 6, and 7. So, this is going to be the end of our discussion in proportions. Z-test 1 proportion. Cut ko na muna siya at this point, and I'll see you next time. Bye!